So today I want to take you through all of the factions and tell you my opinion about how good they are, with some unique content that I've come up that's never been done before. It's a tier list, baby. Obviously, it's a tier list. Was it going to be anything else? We have the win rates of every single faction according to Meta Monday as of last week. So let us go through the armies, the win rates, the changes, and how we think they are going to be for the next 3 months. Because in the next 3 months, we're going to get some new codexes, but most importantly, in June, we're also going to get a new balance update and new points. Currently, the best army in the game, as of last week, is Thousand Sons. Thousand Sons are really, really good. In the US, they're not super popular. In the UK and Europe, they are very, very popular. Now, they didn't get a whole bunch of changes. They got some targeted nerfs on the enhancements, specifically the Arcane Vortex and the Lord of Forbidden Knowledge. They had a 58% win rate with their 27 players, but overall like a 52% win rate. Now, Games Workshop is aiming for the 45. They've obviously had some targeted changes on those enhancements. Arcane Vortex. I think Lord of Forbidden Knowledge is the one where you can do the same ritual again, which is obviously super strong. And they overall, barring the enhancements, got like a points drop on some random unit. Ultimately, this balanced data slate was mostly targeted at like bulk faction wise, cheap infantry like cultists, tanks that we're going to use like Vindicators, and like Terminators as a whole. They're like the main one that if a faction had those, they were dropped. Okay, they went down in points. But overall, the army is really, really strong. It's very good. It's a very good counter. It has a lot of maneuverability because you have like the rituals that can make a unit move like twice or 3 times, such as Magnus, for example. You can turn off saves. They're relatively durable as well. They can shoot through walls with flamers, which is super strong, like really good. But they're not an easy army to play. In the right hands, definitely strong. Easy army to play? I don't think so. So personally, I think they are A tier. And for clarity, if it's towards the left, that is higher than the ones towards the right. As you go towards the right, you're getting closer to B tier. Next army, chat. Adeptus Mechanicus. As of last week, Admech actually came up all right and got a 53% win rate, but there was 14 players. The average is around 20 to 25 as a low, and then leads up to like 70 people playing Necrons. So Admech ultimately are a super hard faction to play, and most of their units are pretty crap. Now they have a lot of good units, like Breaches, for example, but overall the faction isn't great. Now, they had a huge bunch of points drops on things like Rangers, the Disintegrator. Belisarius Core got a 30-point drop. But ultimately, everything that drops you're not really taking. And I still don't think, barring like Sidonian Scatros for a cheap 60-point lone operative, most of the stuff you were taking actually cares. Admech can be very good. They have like a very specific horde build, which we spoke about on stream last week, with the fact that you infiltrate and then scout and then deep strike and move and block your opponent in. But it's very much negative play experience for the opponent. And because they came down in points, the army overall is just like super, super expensive. So they aren't a fun army to play with. They aren't a fun army to play against. They don't really act as they should on the tabletop. They just deny movement. It's a really interesting playstyle, but I don't think people enjoy it. And it's one of the most expensive armies to put on the tabletop. Whilst they can win, I don't think they're very good. Personally, I put Admech at low C. Arguably D tier. Eldar. D. Cringe. Aeldari have had a humongous amount of nerfs. Now, they got some interesting points drops, like Storm Guardians came down quite a bit. Guardian Defenders came down. Got Howling Banshees. Okay, maybe you don't care. Striking Scorpions. Okay, maybe you don't care. The Phoenix Gem went up. Shadow Spectres went up. D-Cannons went up for the 4th time. The 4th time they've gone up in points for the support weapons. So they are like really, really hard to play now. More and more people are going to put them down because people who are playing them well are excellent players. But with the points rise, you're getting even less on the table. You're having to rebuild your army in a completely different way. And I don't think it's going to be as strong as it was. People are taking 5 prisms, 3 support weapons, 3 units of like a Fugan, Autat Wayleaper. I think they've like been hit quite hard again. Because I think they were doing pretty well. I think it was more down to the player's skill of being able to utilize the faction rather than the army being itself very good. I'd like to put them in B tier. I think they, in the right hand, someone might figure out a really weird list and that might get popular. They still have really good stratagem support. They have really good units, but the units are just getting more and more expensive. Imperial Agents, I'm going to put unplayable because they're not really an army. Now, obviously, you can say with all of the options you can tag into other armies, because you've got Karaya Draxus, one of the best units in the game, with especially with Custodes. You've got the Callous Assassin, one of the best units in the game, especially with like Imperial Knights, for example. The data sheets are great. Ultimately, Imperial Agents on their own aren't playable factions. So I'm going to put them in D because they literally don't play. But when we're looking at other armies, we will talk about being able to ally them in. Custodes exclusively. It'll be like Custodes with Karaya Draxus, you know. We'll talk about Imperial Knights using the Callous Assassin, using the Henchmen. Unplayable army because they aren't an army, okay? Black Templars, baby! An interesting faction because they actually have two very, very strong builds. Black Templars had a 52% win rate. You know, with 20 players. Iron Storm being probably a tank version of Black Templars, having a 64% win rate. And Righteous Crusade being lower at 44, but Gladius and Firestorm being high at 52 and 60. But so Black Templars have the Gladiator spam with the Predators, which is how I was previously playing. And then they also have the Sword Brethren build. Now, both versions of this list were nerfed last week. The Gladiators all went up 5 points each. Sword Brethren went up. Obviously, they're like a super crucial unit, usually running like 3 units of 5, one with Hellbrechten. Really, really good unit, really good profile. And then the Crusader Squad, the cheapest unit, was previously 75 points, now 85 points for basically 5 Space Marines. Great little unit, very, very cheap, multi-melter, do actions, 2 wounds, you know, just cheap on the ground bodies. Everything got it more expensive. The Black Templar Impulsor went up. Anything that had a free multi-melter for 5 points, which obviously wasn't free, went up in cost. Things that they were doing well against got a little bit cheaper. So there's like a little bit of a swing in power there. The nice thing about Black Templars is they have 2 ways to play. The bad thing is one is super cool and one is cringe. Templar tanks that I was playing. Mega cringe. Ultimately, I still think they're really strong. Still are A tier, but they're going to be a lot lower down than some of the armies we're going to put up here. Okay, Blood Angels, the next faction. Now, Blood Angels have been a little bit interesting. Again, they got a lot of freedom because of the factions they can choose from. They can take Stormlands if they want to. They can play Gladius. They can take Firestorm, Ironstorm. But Sons of Sanguinius got a big change in the last balanced data slate. It got a lot better. So now on the charge, you get +1 attack and +2 strength. And I would say that +2 strength, big difference in my opinion. Blood Angels S tier for having a 50% win rate as of last week. Now, ultimately, they are on a little bit of the low side. People playing Gladius are struggling. People playing Sons of Sanguinius are struggling. They are the most popular way to play them, which is obviously going to skew the stats a little bit more than normal. The Sons of Sanguinius is one of the best ways to play them now. Overall, Blood Angels had quite a few points nerfs. Death Company are one of the most obvious picks in the book, and they all went up in points. Lamartis went up. Sanguinary Priest, both versions went up. But they did get some interesting drops. They got the Death Company Dreadnought, Death Company Intercessors, Sanguinary Guard all came down. Ultimately, I think Blood Angels benefit from the other drops in the Space Marine book, such as like Incursors and stuff like that. So I would say they are actually pretty good. I think I'm going to be a little bit biased. I think this is a very strong faction. I think it has a lot of play. I think any fast-moving, hard-hitting Space Marine list is going to be strong. I do think high B, low A. Like, in the right game, they are very strong, and they probably get hard countered if they whiff against one of the tanks. But the fact is they can get to, like, strength 8 with +1 to wound and lethal for 1 CP. I think the list build that I've been playing, which is like a spin on Innis's list, is very, very good. I do think they're probably like high B for Blood Angels, because they're ultimately, again, any combat army has a high skill floor, but I do think they're very strong. Chaos Knights next. They actually got no changes whatsoever. The fact that everything else had changes them inherently. Ultimately, they got no change. So what that's going to mean is the current list that they play, which is like 10 War Dogs, maybe some Demon allies, is probably going to continue being the same list. Chaos Knights only have one playstyle. All of the big knights you never see on the tabletop. I think they're good, but they get hard counted a lot, which is the problem with knights as a whole. I think Chaos Knights and knights can probably go together, but I feel like knights are either dominate their opponent because they can't kill enough tanks in one turn, or they are hard countered where someone kills like 4 of them in a turn, and then it's kind of like game after that. Everything is too high cost or too low cost, and they can die really easily. So I think probably Chaos Knights high C tier. Okay, Death Guard. Death Guard, they've like had a bit of a funny one because Death Guard were really rubbish. Literally one of the worst armies in the game for quite a while. They had the huge update, and then they've not really had much since. But I think most of the army is one of them funny ones because they've got like a really, really good detachment now. the fact that you can choose what type of debuff you have along with -1 toughness, it's really good. But I think the problem is they don't want to make everything too cheap, because they don't want it to be a swarm army, because Death Guard are supposed to be a swarm army, which ultimately means the indirect is still very expensive. They're very tough to kill, don't get me wrong. They are super expensive. The infantry are really good, barring the Blightlord Terminators. Blightlord Terminators would have been nice if they got points drop like the other Terminators, but 330 points for 10 models is very expensive. When Death Shroud, you can get 3 for 120. And again, I don't think the playstyle is going to change at all. The tanks are decent, but there's like no like real good buff pieces for them, except for Mortarion exclusively. Now, it's nice that Death Guard have Mortarion to ignore hits, wounds, etc. modifiers, so they can ignore Hour of Contempt, they ignore cover, for example. I feel like they don't get enough for their point, because they have no defensive buff still, and I think that's still their problem. So I would say they're low B tier. Leagues of Votann, 54% as of the weekend we've had last, but around 49 to 50% win rate overall. A bit of a funny one, because they've had a huge change in their balanced data slate as well, and they've seemed to leveled out a relatively decent army, whilst relying on spamming Sagittars still, which is probably not the greatest thing. Now, I think the problem is with Votann is they don't have a lot of units to play with, so they feel all more skewed to a single list. But Hearthking Warriors coming down, which is nice, which essentially they play the same but with more enhancements. So the stuff they already have, which has loads of rules, they now have even more rules on there. So I don't think they're great. I think in the right hands, they're decent. You don't really see them on the top tables, hardly ever. They've not got a lot of depth. They've got not a lot of options, you know. I would say they're probably worse than Death Guard. And I think they're like high C tier. Maybe low B. Maybe low B, but probably a C tier. Chaos Space Marines next. We're a really good faction. They got absolutely hammered in the previous balance update in January, and now loads has come down. Chaos Space Marines had so much come down. Morlophine, Possessed, Legionnaires came down. Probably one of the best units in the book. Venom Crawler came down. Cultists came down. Again, Cultists, great for playing the mission. Terminators came down. I still think Terminators and Abaddon is pretty decent because they get access to all of the marks. So they get some really, really good stratagems. Again, in the right hands, they're going to be insanely good, but they got points dropped on all the units they like taking already. I say A tier for spiky kids with the points drop. Yeah, I would definitely say, because like Possessed came down to 130 for 5, and you think like Sword Brethren are like 150 for 5 and fill a similar role. Chaos Space Marines, I believe, are due a codex sometime soon. So I don't want to go crazy with them because they're going to get a huge update. They could get completely nerfed. They might be insanely good. I think low A currently. Again, you can put them on top of B, but I think with the point shops, they push them over a little bit. Adeptus Custodes. Okay, Adeptus Custodes. Now, they're not going to stay in D. Previously, I would have put them up here. Like there, maybe even here. Because they were just winning. They were just like absolutely smashing most events. They were always podiuming. They were like the ultimate gatekeeper army. A 52% win rate, 52% win rate. But they've lost access to Devastating Wounds Protection, which drops them down to here. And then they lost access to really good detachments, which drops them down to here. I still think they're very good. I think the data sheets are still very, very good. But I think the detachments don't benefit them very much. So I think probably C tier is probably okay. I still think because of the units being very good, it still carried them a long way. Blade Champion with Caesar's Hunter is still great. Wardens are still great. Alaris Custodian Shield Captains are great now. Charge and Valoris is still pretty good. He came down as well, so even though he lost one of his abilities, he did come down in points. I think overall, the army's a little bit harder to play now, but I think the data sheets in that book are still insanely good for what they are. So let's do Chaos Demons now. I think they got no changes either, but again, everything around them got cheaper. That's what you have to keep remembering. If they didn't change, everything around them got cheaper or more expensive. What did they suffer one? Because like I think the data sheets overall are okay. The detachment's really good. They're basically carried by Be'lakor. So I'm going to say like low B. Yeah, the problem is with demons is their lesser demons don't do much, right? The greater demons are really good. All the big monsters are really choppy, really good on the table, but everything else is a bit meh. I think in the right hands, they are really good. If you take all greater demons, maybe they're up here, maybe high B. If you take all greater demons in the right hands, they are super scary. But you are pretty much reliant on taking Be'lakor. So next up, we got Dark Angels. Dark Angels are relying on Ironstorm quite a lot. They play Ironstorm loads. They recently had, the problem is with Dark Angels, they got nerfed indirectly with the Space Marine buff, which hit the Storm Ravens, which obviously they were taking quite a lot. But overall, Dark Angels got a really interesting one because Deathwing Knights came down, Terminators came down, Inner Circle came down, which I don't think many people care. But Lionel Johnson came down 50 points, which is actually huge. But they still can sit on Ironstorm if they really want to. Obviously, Ironstorm got nerfed. So I think a lot of factions that are relying on Ironstorm are going to sit a little bit lower than normal. Like I said, like Black Templars would have been high A, maybe S tier. But now they're dropped down a little bit. I do think Dark Angels probably sit around the A tier. Maybe slightly worse than Chaos Space Marines. D for Inner Circle Companions. Inner Circle Companions aren't great, to be honest. They're alright, but 90 points, they're okay. But I do think with Ironstorm, they're still really good. They can still take some decent units. They have access to the Dark Shroud. They can give out like cover and stealth, which is cool. But I do think Dark Angels are pretty good. I do think Dark Angels are actually really good. Deathwatch, they are more playable than Imperial Agents because they are a real army, but they are a bad army. All of their units are too expensive. All their stratagems are bad. All their units are just generally trending down. They lost a lot when the index went to codex because they lost a bunch of units, and they've had nothing since. They've not had a big release. They've not had a rules change. They've not had a points drop. They've had nothing in this update, which is like brutal. Deathwatch are literally the worst army in the game at a 40% win rate. There's only 2 people playing them. It's just a bit sad at this point. It would have been nice if they got like a couple of points dropped just to like throw a bone. But like not even a little bit, just so they can keep playing for a little while, is really disappointing. Really, in my opinion, really, really disappointing. I think it's a really big miss from GW. Drukhari. So Drukhari were really bad. And then they got their new detachment, which like did a big number on them. Now, I think they still struggle because I think the Sky Splinter is pretty much exclusively the only one they play now. Now, overall, army-wise, like army to army, faction to faction, Drukhari are still hard to play, but I feel like their detachment really did a number on them to a point where it flipped the faction from being absolutely awful to absolutely interesting and more fun. But they didn't get a points drop, which is a bit of a shame. I don't think they were like insanely strong. They were just very, very playable before with their new detachment. But currently, because I've had no points drops, other things have got worse, other things have got better. So I feel like they're like a mid-level army, I would say. Amazing detachments, but their data sheets are still a bit bad. They still die to a stiff breeze, you know? So I would probably say they're like high C, low B. Right, okay, Genestealer Cult's next. Genestealer Cult's generally trending down. 9 players, about 50%, 50 to 47, so around an average of 48.5% win rate, so 48%. They've been like a really weird faction because, again, the problem is with Genestealer Cults, I think they're still struggling to balance them after their previous sins, and they have been ever since. Where they were too cheap, everything was insanely good, they brought them back for free, and they just got a bunch of really good rules like Deep Strike 3, for example. But I think a lot of factions do what they do better now, and I don't think they have like a unique playstyle. Everything that they do, what other armies can do now, because they're old abilities was like Deep Strike within 9, which is like very unique. Now every army has Deep Strike within 9, and Monolith can do it now. Now Rock Grinders came down in points, it's interesting. Trucks came down, which is cool. Aberrants came down, they're a bit slow, but they're still 360 points of 10. And then Ridge Runners came down, they're just not that great. I think maybe I lied about D tier, and I think I'm going to add Genestealers there as well. We have Grey Knights next. Very, very tricksy army. Had a lot of points dropped. Had lots of like little changes, like the Grandmaster got a little bit better and the Dread Knights got a little bit better in the last balance update. Big points change this one. They had the Librarian, the Tech Marine, and the Dread Knight all go up in points. That feels really harsh because everyone was taking Dread Knights, spamming like 1 Grandmaster, maybe 3 Dread Knights. But the problem is with Grey Knights is they don't deal with high toughness stuff. The way they deal with that is Dread Knights, because everything in their army is strength 6, -2, 2 damage in combat, barring Dread Knights, okay? And they got some guns that are better. They got some las cannons on Land Raiders, etc. But ultimately, in combat, strength 6, -2, 2 damage, barring the Dread Knights. Now, obviously, they got nerfed, but actually, along with that, a lot of stuff came down in point. Like Strike Squads, which you are always taking, have come down in point. Purgation Squad are actually a really interesting unit. They don't need line of sight if another unit can see them. Interceptors are really cheap now. Are really, really cheap. Currently a 51% win rate. They're perfectly balanced. People are still going to take Librarians. People are probably going to take maybe 1 less Dread Knight, maybe take a Land Raider instead or something. you're probably going to see like a bit more of a mixed army rather than like just Dread Knights. So I'm going to say they're B tier. I think in the right hands, they can be really good. I think they're like right up here because they have a lot of playset. I think they're like perfectly middle B tier. Imperial Knights has the exact same problem as Chaos Knights, but they have Canis Rex. Canis Rex is an insanely good data sheet. They have access to allies such as henchmen, such as Kyraidraxis, for example. So I think they're low C. I think they're low C. I literally think they sit right next to Chaos Knights. I think Imperial Knights are probably a little bit better. War Dog spam's hard, but I feel like Imperial Knights have a little bit more option. Like, it's pretty much War Dogs and Nurglings. There's like no in between. There's no option. There's no flavor. That is what you're playing if you're playing Chaos Knights. Imperial Knights have a little bit more going for them. You can run the bigger ones with some henchmen, with some Kyraidraxis if you want it at the back. They can play the Armigers and use the Bondsmen. I think overall they're going to sit there. So next we have Astra Militarum. Astra Militarum were very good. I think they've been hit very hard in the balanced data slate, specifically if you played a good list and was winning tournaments with it. Because the Manticore, the Bullgryns, the Basilisks, and the Kasrkin all went up. Astra Militarum, I would have said, sat at S tier. Big time. But with all of the nerfs, like, no way. No way. They're, like, really going to struggle. I don't even think they drop down here. I don't even think they sit here. I think they sit, like, I don't know, maybe somewhere in B tier now. Maybe Grey Knights maybe play into them a bit better because they lost all their indirects. Kasrkin have been nerfed. Bullgryn have been nerfed. All the indirects have been nerfed. So they have to start playing Leman Russes again. And ultimately, Leman Russes hit hard, but they're a bit slow. They have to jump around terrain. So I don't think they're great. So I think probably there. I think every other faction just plays better than them now. So, okay, so that's Astra Militarum. We've got 7 left. Necrons, previously S tier. Necrons, previously S tier. Josh Roberts playing them and winning every single event ever. But he nerfed them in very targeted ways. Some very harsh, like the Nightbringer going up like 40 points is crazy harsh. But every other unit felt pretty right. Now, I definitely think they're still very, very good, but they're not S tier. They're not S tier anymore. They lost too much. A lot of things went up in points. A lot of the key units, if you're playing Hypercrypt, the Monolith went up. If you're playing Canoptek Court, the Technomancer went up. That's just like 2 units as a reference that just went up and like took it really hard. And Hypercrypt, the enhancement also went up, which is harsh. So like all of the right things went up in points, and a lot of things came down, but it's a lot of stuff that you don't really play, such as Ophidian Destroyers, Scorpet Destroyers. If you want to play the Destroyer Detachment, you're having a great time. But as a competitive faction, definitely not great now. So I think they definitely dropped down to A tier. I think Thousand Suns probably play better than them now. Probably better than Black Templars because they just play the game better. Are they better than Tau? We still don't know because of the points. I think Chaos Space Marines are probably right up here. I think maybe it's going to start looking something like this maybe. I think they're interesting. I think a lot of people are going to still play them. I think the lists are going to look very similar. But I don't think they're as good. Orks. No questions. Orks are my stupid, dumb, no-brain win. I think Orks are going to be crazy good as soon as people buy 18 Mega Knobs, some Knobs, and play Bully Boys. I think everybody's going to be playing Bully Boys with half a brain cell and just pushing boys around and wiring twice a game. I think Orks are super strong in the War turn, and anything that gives Orks 2 Wars is a bit crazy. So I think Orks are probably the best army in the game now. Now, obviously, I've got no data to back that up. We've just had a brand new codex. The points have been very favorable to Orks. It's like a completely different world when you look at Custodes compared to Orks, like what happened to them. They're going to call a war, advance and charge, call another war, and then you're going to be tabled. Because, like, Mega Knobs are insanely hard to kill. They get the Invuln, they get the Forward Feeling of Pain. I think it's just going to be crazy, to be honest. The army just, like, feels so much more well thought out as, like, a competitive army compared to Custodes. They are actually, internal balance-wise for the detachments is really good. I think all of the detachments are really playable. I think Bully Boys stands out as, like, insanely strong compared. The double war, you just can't look past the double war, you know? Like, you can't look at that detachment and go, oh, maybe I'll play something else, you know? Well, obviously, me and Magoo had a great game the other night, and he used the Cult of Speed one. Again, got some really great stratagems, some really great synergy with the army. And then with the Death Dread one, the Dreadmail one, got some great synergy with the army. Looks really strong. The little random dice roll as well for the buff is great. But I think Bully Boys is stupid. So Sisters of Battle, common units went up like Arco Flagellants and the Blade of St. Eleanor. Blade of Eleanor was taking on the Palatine every time to make her super choppy, because she gets like the plus damage if she's taking wounds, and then she gets +1 to hit and wound if she's taking wounds because she's Assistants of Battle. Arco-Flagellants are like one of the tankiest cheat units in the game. They went up a little bit to 50 points for 3 models, which feels a bit expensive, but I think they were good. Repentia aren't too expensive. They're 5 points more for a few extra models. Are a more diverse army compared to a lot, because a lot of other armies look very skewed. Play really well. They're at a high win rate. They're like 54 on average over 12 weeks, 57 in our last update we had. I do think they are A tier. I think they sit around... I think they probably sit there. I think they're slightly worse than Necrons. Because they both got nerfed, I think they were probably in this position. I don't know if they're better than Black Templars. I feel like that's probably more accurate, actually, thinking about it. Next up, Space Marines. Now, when I'm talking about Space Marines, I'm talking about Space Marines without supplements, and no Blood Angels, no Space Wolves, etc. Space Marines are definitely worse than every other Space Marine faction. They have so much less options. Like, you look at Blood Angels and Dark Angels. Like, Dark Angels especially is a crazy one, because they not only do they use the Space Marine Codex, they also have another 3 detachments to play with. Like, Raw Ironstorm is decent. It's better as Black Templars. It's better as Dark Angels. They have Firestorm. Okay, with Vulcan, it's kind of interesting. But then you can have Blood Angel Firestorm, which I still really like. You can like play any of the attachments as something else and just get loads more options. So ultimately, it'll never place any higher than any other Space Marine army in this game. Everything the Space Marines do, another Codex supplement does better because they have the option. I think they're C tier, but I think they're low C tier. Okay, Space Wolves, which is more specifically White Scars if they had bike options. Space Wolves are pretty much carried by Stormlands. The Wolf Scouts and Wolf Terminators came down. You weren't taking Wolf Terminators. You might have been taking Scouts. But ultimately, Space Wolves get better because of the changes to Space Marine. Assault Interceptor with Jump Pack. Something a little bit interesting. Incursors are a good little forward deploy. And that's about it. Space Wolves are really good, but only because you're playing them as White Scars, essentially. 45% win rate, but an average of 49. Everyone is playing Stormlands at a 55% win rate. The trick was to take Devastators and then take the Ekmarine with the Servitors. Iron Priest, and then you could attach them together and get like 9 multi-melters. So yeah, I think Space Wolves are high A. I've seen one particular player, Matt McCurdy, take Space Wolves and beat some of the best players in the country. So I think they're definitely A tier. They might even be up here. But ultimately, I think this part of A is getting a bit messy. And if we said these are all in the same place, I don't think I'd be mad about that. We got 2 armies left. Tyranids. Tyranids got like quite a few updates, but most thing was Gargoyles went up, which a lot of people were taking to play the mission, and everything that people were taking didn't come down. Well, some interesting things came down, like the Lictor at 55 points is like super interesting. Zone Throats going down to 100 points for 3 is also super interesting, because they're like really decent anti-tank shooting. They're really survivable, and 3 for 100 points is nice. Ultimately, the way they play isn't going to change. They might squeeze in a unit of Zone Throats. They might have to drop something for Gargoyles. But I think overall, all the rest of the units should not crazy about. Like, maybe you put a Psychophage in because they're super cheap at 95 points. Maybe put some Zone Throats in for some anti-tank range. But like the Lictor you might have taken is come down, which is cool. But Gargoyles are going up, which is annoying. So I think Tyranids, they definitely sit like probably around here. They still have Biovores, Lens, and Homers every turn, which is great. But they're just like, they don't have a lot to deal with anything. Their highest strength weapon is like strength 9 or something stupid. But they have like a lot of detachments to play with. I think probably like low C is probably fine. I don't see Tyranids on the table too much. And I think that's just because they're bad. Now, World Eaters are an interesting one. They got like a super hard nerf last balanced Dataslate. This one, they got some like decent points drops on things like Jackals, on Khorne Berserkers, on the Hellbrute maybe. But I think they still struggle because they're very one-dimensional. I think when they get it right, they get it right. But maybe too right, kind of like Tau. And then when they get it wrong, they get it really wrong. I think it's really hard to balance this faction. The hard nerf was really brutal, but the Khorne Berserkers came down. So I do think they probably sit maybe high C, low B. But yeah, like they got some nice points drops. They just get a little bit more now because they're already taking a bunch of Khorne Berserkers. So like a 20-30 points drop might get them a enhancement, which would be nice. I feel like into the right army, they can do really well. Is World Eaters the Tau of melee? Definitely. That's what I'm kind of saying. I think because Tau are one-dimensional, as in a shooting phase, World Eaters are one-dimensional, a combat phase. Okay, I think that's my tier list. I think that's my 40k faction tier list, and hopefully you enjoy this type of content. And if you did, let me know down in the comments below. Because maybe you haven't already.